The way that I felt about space travel when I was going to space camp and when I was growing up, the optimism of like, we're going to go to Mars and we're going to do all these things. It feels to me like nowadays, because of the privatization and a lot of different other things that are involved, it feels less optimistic. But I love that he found a way to grasp onto that feeling that I had, that indomitable like human spirit. We're going to, travel the stars and we can do all these things through science and math. And he really identified that and infused it so much into his fiction.
Welcome, friends, to episode 376 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss Andy Weir's 2021 novel, Project Hail Mary. So we're back with Andy Weir, James. This is an author that we discussed, a few years ago when we did The Martian.
Yes.
He's an author that I'm a fan of. I really like his approach to hard sci-fi. It's a subgenre of science fiction that really gets into the nitty-gritty details of the science and the sort of concepts behind it. It shows its work in a way that a lot of science fiction doesn't. And I think he approaches it in this really accessible, light, and kind of jokey manner that I just find it incredibly compelling to read. Yeah, I'm just delighted to be back with one of his novels. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, this is one that I genuinely anxiously anticipating. Like I was so looking forward to this for such a long time. When we covered The Martian, that was one of my favorite projects of that year. And I just appreciate the fact that Andy Weir is making me feel smarter than I actually am when I'm reading his stories. I'm not somebody who I enjoyed and was engaged by math and science, but reading it, he makes it so easy to follow along. He introduces the concepts in a way that's familiar to people who have learned about it before, or even if you haven't, a refresher / introduction to some of these different sciences and formulas and ways that characters are tackling tasks. And I think in The Martian and also here in Project Hail Mary, there's a really fun mystery element that you get to go along and try to predict what the character might do before they do it. And I had a lot of fun, actually. I listened to the audiobook mostly. I also read the physical copy, but listened to it with my wife, and it was so fun to be interacting in that way. We would pause it sometimes and be like, this is what I think is happening right now, what's about to happen. And that was just cool.
She hadn't read it before?
She had not, yeah.
Oh, nice.
So we got to experience it together. And I had heard for a long time that this audiobook, people would say, I have one Audible credit, or I have one, I want to buy one audiobook for a road trip or something. People would consistently recommend this book for the last 4 or 5 years. And it lived up to it. The audiobook was great. Ray Porter is the narrator, the person who reads it. And there's so many different accents, and there's a character that speaks in a unique way, and the way that he was able to connect all of it and keep it very engaging through Andy Weir's work, which can be dense at times, but that credit to Andy Weir in that way, that he's able to keep high concepts interesting and engaging. I just overall love this project, and I can't believe with the marketing machine in full effect, seeing all the different things that people are talking about. There's press screenings going on and early screenings. I'm just really excited to dive in and get to see this film. It's definitely one that I think could be on the list of one of the best of the year. Yeah,
I mean, we haven't seen the movie yet, so who knows? But I'm hearing good things. I agree. Very exciting times. It's so. This is a time in our country where, I'm very pessimistic about the way science is being engaged with and dismissed, and experts are being dismissed, and, all of that. And yet it heartens to me to see a movie like this doing well and getting positive buzz, because it engages with science so head on and so seriously. But yeah, man, I just want to lay out for the listeners real quick. We are going to have a fairly robust, non-spoiler discussion here at the start, where we won't be spoiling any of the story details, maybe some conceptual stuff we'll talk about, but nothing, no big specific plot points. And then we'll move into a spoiler section where we'll do all of that. So if you haven't even seen the movie or read the book, you're safe for now, but we'll let you know before we get into that. Yeah, man, that's a good point about the audiobook as well, by the way. It won an award for the Audie Award, which is given to the best audiobook of the year, and that was in 2022. So this is a highly regarded audiobook. I also listened to it. I have the physical copy, and I would read along at times, like I often do. But yeah, I really enjoyed the audiobook as well. I think it's well deserved. And just a cool story for it. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit here, and I don't think this is a spoiler to say because it's just kind of like a basis for the character. Our main character here, Ryland Grace, is a junior high school science teacher. And I think this ends up being such a perfect protagonist for Andy Weir because in so many ways, I feel like he is the like ideal junior high school science teacher that you could ever have. He's someone who, much like, I mean, this is very dark, much like a Walter White in Breaking Bad, clearly has like way more knowledge and know-how than you would expect for someone who is just like a teacher at that level, and yet engages with and seems to have a passion for turning this really advanced concepts and, you know, scientific ideas and problems and finding ways to package it in a way that is engaging and entertaining. And I think the best teachers do that. Mm-hmm. And I think Andy Weir, through his fiction, is doing exactly that for all of us in like a fourth wall breaking way, right? Like if you step back and look at his fiction, I think that's what he's doing. So I love that. And this character is like a perfect representation of that.
And I love like what he's doing with the idea of a teacher too, right? Like people, there's a super famous phrase, those who can do, those who can't teach. And I was, it's pretty derogatory, I think, to teachers. Yeah,
definitely.
This idea of somebody being just eternally curious. I think that's something that Andy Weir is like promoting with these kinds of stories. And I've always found myself to be that kind of a person. Like I don't really care what the subject is. If it's shown to me in an engaging way, I'm always interested and curious to learn about it. And I think that kind of mindset is a positive one for anybody to approach the world with. And the way that a teacher, the importance of a teacher too, especially in today's day and age, like the importance of connecting with students and shaping young minds and shaping the future in a lot of ways, and like how the story is reflecting that and what it truly means to like pass on something to the next generation. I thought he did that brilliantly, and it's highlighting anyone in elementary to high school education, that they're underutilized, they're overworked, they are underpaid. Like there's so much going on there. And I think for this to be our hero, for this character to come from that and show like there's so many layers to people and individuals, and in this case characters, that I thought that was a fun thing for him to do, to like kind of make teachers cool in that way.
Yeah, I mean, if I was a middle school science teacher, I feel like, I don't know if you're allowed to assign a novel, but if I could, I would, man, because this would be such a fun way to explore all the different concepts that are in here, to explore like astronomy, astrobiology, like all these different kind of heady topics, maybe even, like high school teacher as well. But you can do it in such a way that is engaging and entertaining, and I think students would respond to. And it might make them excited about science class a little bit too. So I love all of that. And, props to him for finding this character, because I was reading that this story idea is partly borrowed from an abandoned project. So this is in reference to a profile in the New York Times where Weir said that after he completed The Martian, he began a multi-volume space opera that he was going to call Zhek, that was going to be about a substance that could absorb electromagnetic radiation that then could be used for fuel for interstellar travel. He wrote about 75,000 words before abandoning the project, and then beginning his novel Artemis, which we haven't covered, but that's I think the novel that came out in between these two.
Yeah.
It was later.
Just in terms of adaptations, that's got to be getting like an adaptation.
Oh no, it is. I think it might be the same people behind this. Is what maybe you'll see more about this when you research the film. Yeah. But I think it's been delayed. I think for some different reasons I was reading, but I believe it is getting an adaptation as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And we haven't necessarily said that strictly. So if this is the first time you're listening to the podcast, this episode's just about the book. Next week we're going to cover just the film, and what we like to do is talk about it from like a craft perspective. This is less of a review, more of like, we like to dig into the nitty gritty of like what the filmmakers and the writers are doing.
Right. So he abandons that project, but he ends up borrowing several elements from it, which, just going over that, you can probably identify. And one of them includes a ruthless bureaucrat character. We know that character is borrowed from that. So that's a really interesting writing thing to me. Just the wherewithal to realize that a project isn't working, to be willing to abandon it, but then also be willing to sort of scrap it and scrap it for parts, so to say, and go like, well, what was some stuff in here that was working? I think it's cool, and I'm impressed with that. And I think this story feels more in keeping with maybe this has been packaged to me, but my sort of conception of what Andy Weir is as a writer. Whereas a multi-volume space opera is kind of outside of what I would expect from him. Not to say he can't do it. Maybe he will at some point. And, I'm sure it would be really well done and still feel like, it's in his voice. But this sort of near future, our world basis gives a certain familiarity and a certain access to the language, like contemporary language, that I think makes sense for him and that he really shines when he operates in this space.
Yeah, I think I would love to read a three story opera, space opera by Andy Weir.
Certainly be curious, yeah.
Yeah, but like you said, the way that it's so close to us in a sense, and how it's like using hard science and like true biology and physics and some of that stuff that's baked into it is like you can truly see how many people, I'm sure, were inspired to pursue science and STEM by something like Star Wars, in the 70s. And like that's awesome, and I love the way that does that in a space opera format. But because this is so close and because it's so familiar, I can just see it being such an easy stepstone for somebody to read this and be like, I'm going to go into this field of, STEM.
Yeah. It's a lot closer, whereas something like Star Wars is almost like a space fantasy. Right. I'm not saying you can't like see that and go, "Ooh, I want to get into STEM," but like an interesting comparison I was reading. Some people have been comparing him, and he says it seems like he's not super comfortable with this comparison, but people are comparing him to Michael Crichton, an author we have covered on this podcast, in the way that Michael Crichton would write these thrillers, but he'd connect them to scientific concepts. He connected it often to medical stuff, but also, obviously, Jurassic Park,
DNA.
Which has to do with like DNA. And the way that Michael Crichton would sort of show his work and like describe how we're going to make a dinosaur rather than just like they do it, hand wave away. It's not to say that everything that he describes is doable, but it is like plausible and it's like well thought through, and it's like it's an interesting hypothesis of like maybe this could happen. I think a lot of the best sort of nitty gritty sci-fi can do that, and I can see why people would make this comparison, because also the other thing that Michael Crichton was famous for is getting tons of adaptations. Like Hollywood loved his stuff, and Andy Weir is shaping up to be the same kind of author. I think every one of his novels is getting optioned. The Martian was a huge success right out of the gates, got immediately optioned for a film within a year. I think it came out 2015 after the novel came out in 2014. It had been published in other ways on his blog and stuff over time, but he just like has arrived on the scene and shown that he writes in a way that filmmakers are attracted to. He's even said that he has a long history of science fiction films that have influenced his writing, and so he feels like he writes in kind of a cinematic way that maybe lends itself to adaptation. That could be one thing that people are attracted to. But I also want to just give him credit, because hard sci-fi is not the genre that you would think like, oh yeah, filmmakers are going to love this, because it can often seem like kind of dry or like not entertaining enough. Not, maybe the characters can often be weaker. Like there's a lot of carryovers from, the quote unquote golden age of sci-fi, where a lot of these criticisms were fairly accurate. But I think Andy Weir, he shines and he's able to buck those trends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the major things that I noticed through these two books that we covered on the podcast now too is like a through line of optimism. And we grew up in the Space Coast, you and I did. And like I went to space camp at Kennedy Space Center growing up.
Nice.
Like
I never got to do that. I went like one day to the Space Center. Did a tour, but I didn't do the camp. So is the camp like a multi-day thing, or like?
Oh yeah, week long. Yeah, we did simulate shuttle landings at the time. When we were growing up, it was the shuttle. Now I'm sure they do other things, but we could do like the multi-axis trainer thing that kind of spins you in different directions, and there's all kinds of awesome stuff that they did.
I wouldn't be able to do that anyway. I'm terrible. Anything that spins me around just makes me immediately ill.
They didn't make everybody do it. It was a voluntary thing, but yeah, it was cool. It was definitely awesome. Anyway, I just mean to say that like space travel was close to me, at least growing up, and you as well, I'm sure. And like the shuttle program was something that I was so, we would hear the shuttle return to
we'd
from
go out
orbit.
in my backyard and like watch the the space shuttle returning or rockets firing off. You'd be like, oh, you could see it You could see it in the sky right now. It was really cool to do.
So cool. And the way that I felt about space travel when I was going to space camp and when I was growing up, the optimism of like, we're going to go to Mars and we're going to do all these things. It feels to me like nowadays, because of the privatization and a lot of different other things that are involved, it feels less optimistic. But I love that he found a way to grasp onto that feeling that I had, that indomitable like human spirit. We're going to, travel the stars and we can do all these things through science and math. And he really identified that and imbues it so much into his fiction. And I just always find it's so like warm and this, it's so like, I don't know, it's something that feels like a juxtaposition, like the idea of like math and science feeling empathetic and like heartwarming, but he's able to do that in these stories. And by like showing the sort of joint effort of like humanity and these like natural phenomena and like these natural principles of the universe, really.
Yeah, I mean, that gets back to what I was saying about him being kind of the ideal teacher, because I think the best teachers can do that. They can take the dry stuff from the textbook and find a way to make it feel real and to make it feel like this is part of our world and it's something that is not some distant concept, and whether that's through demonstrations or storytelling, and he's able to do that here. And I agree, like I've come to realize that edutainment, as they call it, is one of my favorite kinds of entertainment, I guess, out there. I subscribe to like so many different channels that you would probably classify as this. A lot of my favorite science YouTubers, I'm thinking of like Vsauce or even like Hank Green, people like that who do a really good job of exactly this, of finding ways to be entertaining while they talk to you about subjects that might otherwise seem like they wouldn't be entertaining. And I think he's the author who does that best to me. So far, at least, that I've encountered. So I love that about him. Let's talk a little bit about this book as it compares to The Martian, because I was reading through some reviews, and I think a lot of people, seems like Artemis is maybe his least beloved of the three, and I don't know why. I have not read that book. But of these two, still, I think a lot of people are comparing it to The Martian. There's just a tendency to do that when you have this like runaway big hit that is probably the first book that everybody knows from you and is the one that they're going to compare it to. And it got me thinking about how I felt about this as a comparison novel. I guess I don't want to like lead the witness a little bit. So how do you feel about these two next to each other? Like, obviously we can't spoil it, or we don't want to spoil it, but like, do you have like an initial preference, or do you have initial thoughts about which novel does what better?
Yeah, I actually do have a preference, and to me it's not very difficult to parse out. And I think it'd be for different reasons than a lot of people who are drawn to Andy Weir. I thought The Martian was awesome. I think Mark Watney is a really like funny, compelling character. I liked the way that he sort of MacGyvers his way out of the situation, and it's so much about this one character. This story, I guess I'd say it's a little less hard science than like The Martian was. And I think a lot of people are drawn to Andy Weir for that hard science.
I'll lend you a word here. It's a little more speculative.
Speculative. I like it. Yeah. So that's exactly what and I'm drawn to that. Like those are my sensibilities, is I like fantasy stories. I like sci-fi that's in that speculative space, horror, all of that. This story definitely leans heavier on that side into like theoretical stuff that, while The Martian had theoretical stuff going on, this is like theoretical stuff that's pushing the limits of like what we truly could know, and is creating things that don't exist but fit the laws of our universe. I mentioned before that like The Martian is so much about one character. This story is about like a group effort, is what I'll say, and like a way that like humanity is working together, and just like it seems like the universe is working together in a lot of ways to like solve problems. And I feel like that, to me, that story, that seed speaks to me, especially right now. I feel like we need a story like this right now in our world that's so like divided, and it feels just like a lot of negativity in the world right now. And like, while maybe it's more speculative, really speaks to my sensibilities, and I think has like a heart that beats stronger than The Martian.
Nice. It's funny because I proposed this, but I kind of struggle to compare the two because they are, to me, fairly different in significant ways, even though they are so similar in so many ways. But I mean, The Martian is like a survival story, right? It's a man on a desert island trying to survive, but that desert island is Mars, and that's just a really cool idea for a book, and I think he executed it brilliantly. And there's a simplicity to that is really appealing. I think you have one character who's incredibly engaging. The jokes he cuts they're so good. But then, you get this novel, and It's a lot bigger in some ways. We're dealing with a threat to the world. We're dealing with multiple governments having to come together to form some sort of response. And whenever you do that, you're engaging with just like so many massive things that you're going to have a lot of people who might disagree with how this would play out, or be like, I don't know if this would ever go this way, and all of that. And you're dealing with a way more speculative, concept that, as you said, like, it doesn't exist, but it like theoretically could. And so he's dealing with that idea. And I have so much admiration for the way he's able to take an idea, because like some of these ideas he has, I feel like a lot of writers could have them, but he seems particularly well suited to exploring them in a way that a lot of authors are not equipped to do. And that's by really getting into how this would work. And it's not just conceptual. It's like he's going to get down to the specifics. And I love that. It reminds me a little bit of the Three-Body Problem.
Yeah.
Tone is very different, though, because like you said, this is kind of a warm tone, a coming together tone, a sense of cooperation. And I love where that story leads us. I guess we'll get into that when we get into spoilers. But this story leads to some really interesting places that I hadn't seen really done in the science fiction that I've read. And I felt was really refreshing. So I tend to agree with you. I think I might prefer this book. It's hard to say. It's been a long time since I've read The Martian. I did love it when I read it. So, I mean, I think it's at least on par. But I was seeing a lot of people, they seem sort of caught up in this comparison. Is it as good? A lot of people were saying maybe not quite. Like they really liked it, but it wasn't quite as good. I think a lot of that comes down to taste, though. I think there's a lot of people trying to justify, their reasons behind things, where a lot of it really boils down to taste and what kind of story maybe you're more drawn to. Because I think this is a really well executed example of this kind of story. I think you could maybe argue it is a bit longer than maybe it needed to be, but it gives him more space to explore different scenarios. But I don't know. I really liked it. I had a great time with this book. And I'm really excited to see what they do in the film, because as I was saying, like if you feel like the story is a little big, a little perhaps overstuffed with information, you just can't do that in a movie. So you're going to have to pick and choose your battles. You're going to have to pick and choose what are the really important bits, what are the really important concepts and moments that we need to include. And that paring down of this story could potentially create a real gem of a film. So I'm excited to see how that comes together.
Yeah. And it's Phil Lord and Chris Miller who just have this like really great, like I mean, everything that they've put out that they've been able to control the whole time tends to have really strong heart, which this book definitely has. And also just like excellent comedic timing. And
what are they most well known for?
So they did.
We'll get into this next week, obviously, but I'm just.
Yeah.
You mentioned it, so I'm curious.
Most recently, they're like kind of the driving force behind the animated Spider-Verse movies with Miles Morales.
Okay, yeah. And those are great. Okay, that makes sense. All right, man. So we're about to get into spoilers. I guess just real quick, I'll say that when this book came out, it received generally positive reviews. It was nominated for the Hugo Award in 2022. The New York Times bestseller, debuting at number 3 when it came out in May 2021. With the announcement of the film, it has re-entered the New York Times bestseller list and has now been on the list for 38 consecutive weeks as of recording this. So it's got this real, boost by this big film coming out. And so I'm seeing here that it also won the Dragon Award and the Goodreads Choice Award. So, a well-regarded novel even before the film adaptation, but obviously now it's getting so much more attention. But yeah, I'm going to save the talk about Andy Weir, this computer programmer turned sci-fi writer extraordinaire. I will point you to our Martian episode, so that we're not going to rehash it all here, but really interesting stuff there with him. All right, if you're ready, I'm going to read a little chunk of plot here, but we're going to be full spoilers. Some of the plot synopsis I'm reading here spoils things that happen at the end or towards the end of the novel, so just be aware we're going to start spoiling the novel now immediately. In the near future, humanity discovers the sun is dimming due to astrophage, a spaceborne microbe that consumes solar energy to breed using carbon dioxide from Venus. This Petrova line of microbes threatens to trigger a catastrophic ice age within 30 years, effectively ending civilization. In a desperate global response, the world's governments grant Ava Stratt absolute authority to lead Project Hail Mary, a task force dedicated to finding a solution. She recruits Ryland Grace, a former molecular biologist turned junior high school teacher, to study the organisms. Grace discovers that the astrophage is a near-perfect energy storage vessel, which allows Earth to develop a spin drive, a revolutionary engine that uses the microbes as high-output rocket fuel. Because there is only enough time to breed fuel for a one-way trip, the mission to Tau Ceti, the only nearby star resisting the infection, is a suicide mission. Though Grace trains the original science team, a freak laboratory accident kills the primary candidates just before launch. Lacking any other experts, Stratt forces a terrified, unwilling Grace onto the ship under heavy sedation, administering an amnesia-inducing drug to ensure he doesn't sabotage the mission in his grief. All right, so this sets up the premise of this book and the way that it plays out. We don't get some of that stuff revealed until the very end of the book.
Most of it, yeah. This is an interesting time to kind of like talk about that format of the way that it's doled out to us.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight that because I wonder how much of this will be intact in the film adaptation, because in some ways it does work really well. And so I could see a situation where we open with him already on the Project Hail Mary. He doesn't remember how he got there, and because this is how the book opens up, and he has to like start figuring out his environment. I think it's a really kind of cool like closed room mystery at the beginning. It's like, who am I? Why am I here?
Yeah.
Where am I? Oh my gosh, he like has this like he has these cool little experiments where he just like figures out that he is in a different gravity than than you would expect. He doesn't even know his own name. Like the password that he has to know to get out of the room he's in is his own name, and he doesn't know it. So there's just like a really cool like mini story that plays out here at the beginning. Yeah. And then through this, he's able to dole out some memories, and the idea is that he's having some flashes of memories, and he only knows what's contained within those memories. So if they don't include his name, he doesn't learn it. But he learns little things about himself, and it becomes this really cool kind of detective story of like, oh, I know about science. I was able to like immediately draw these conclusions. I must be an astronaut, or I must be a scientist. He has these ideas about like who he is, and then the funny reveal of him realizing that he's like actually a junior high school teacher, and he's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. What am I doing here? And then when he figures out that he must not be on Earth. Those are all really cool little moments, and they involve like little tests, and like that's the kind of stuff that I assume a lot of that is probably not going to make it into the movie, but I hope we get like a little bit of it.
So early on, we find out that like he was in a coma. He's being kept alive by this like robot, these robot arms. Yeah. I think we'll probably get him waking up and not knowing who he is, some of that disorientation, and that in media res, like just dropping us into the middle of the story and being like, look at all this stuff that's going on, and he's trying to figure that out. And that was such an engaging way to start the book, so I hope they start the film the same way.
Yeah.
But I think maybe
we'll probably get
goes along a bit faster.
Yeah, if I was gonna guess, I think we might start there, but when we might fully shift into the back story and get a lot more filled in before we then return to the present, rather than just like the little bits and pieces that we're getting and the whole like you just don't have time for all that. Everything
seemed to be connected. Like he would get the memories at times. He said specifically, Ryland Grace says, they come to me when I don't try to think about them, basically. Yeah. So like these, and every time they come back to him, it's somehow connected obviously to what's happening in the present, and then they overlap. And sometimes in like my only thing that I noticed as these were happening, it was like in fairly convenient ways oftentimes of like him remembering things just in time or right after something's happened, and like maybe that you could justify that as like triggering synapses or whatever in his brain.
That's what I was going to say. I think the justification is that something comes up and that triggers the memory that provides the answer. So I feel like that you could maybe write that off as the reason, because it is often convenient, right? Like he remembers the thing that he needs to know to do this task.
But it does make for a fun like journey along, like
really
we're learning things as the main characters learning them, and he's sort of explaining things and doing experiments that tells the audience what's going on without him having to sit there and just like monologue to us. And I think that's cool. I am curious to see how they're going to handle those flashbacks, because there's so much going on internally also. Like he's reflecting on the flashbacks, and then that gives like greater context to like what's happening. So I'm wondering, I assume that they're going to do this by like looking at some sort of like data log or something that he's like talking to cameras. I think I've seen that in the trailer too. So they'll probably use that device to
data logs. That makes sense. I was wondering if you think we're going to get voiceover, but maybe if they do the log thing, you won't have to do it as much.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I saw that in the trailer, so I'd assume they're going to lean into that.
Yeah, I've only seen the trailer, I think, once, and it was because it came on when I was in the theater for something else, but I haven't sought it out because I've been trying to, like, not be spoiled.
I generally don't mind being spoiled for things, and I remember people being like, avoid the trailer as soon as it came out. Like, it was a big thing online, like, avoid the trailer. Yeah. And I saw the trailer same way in a theater, and I wanted to avoid it, but I was like, I mean, I don't know. I don't care that much about spoilers. And once I saw what the spoiler was, I was like, damn, I kind of wish that I had read the book without the spoiler. This is like one of the few times that I feel like if you can preserve that, it's such a fucking awesome moment.
Yeah, so we can start to get into that, but I guess before we do, because I guess real quick, just to address it, because you brought it up, I think the main spoiler is that there is an alien, and that this is a story with an alien that he is going to talk to, and that is not something I would have expected from an Andy Weir story after reading The Martian, right? So that is kind of a big spoiler, and they put it in the trailer, so it's like we're leading with it. But, looking at this book, like, it is revealed pretty early on. It's really, like, just one piece of so many more larger things that I could see why they would do it as part of the marketing for this film.
And I also think it's 2026, and they're like, we have to get people to come to this movie. We have to. We can't take a chance.
It's getting
on
a huge buzz, so, like,
coy.
I think it's working.
Yeah, they can't play coy in today's day and age. They're like, we have to make money. We have to get people to actually come to a movie theater. So they're like, we gotta blow our load a little bit here, and just, like, kind of like let that be the interesting thing that they want to learn more about.
That's a space term. It's when you jettison your hull.
Yeah,
your payload. Yeah. You blow your payload.
Exactly. Like if you're in 0G and you push off of something, you're gonna gain thrust.
It makes you go backwards. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about this astrophage idea. I think this is so cool. Like, I love this premise, this idea of like a space mold. It's kind of how I thought of it. It is a little like microbe that is able to travel at insane speeds, and it literally feeds on stars. Our star gets infested, basically, with this microbe, and we don't know what to do about it. We can't stop it, and it's siphoning off energy from the star. This is such a cool antagonist of sorts, because it's not really an antagonist. It's kind of just like a thing. It doesn't have like sentient thought in that way. It's not like out to punish. It's just life behaving in the way that life does.
It's man versus nature. Yeah, it's literally just a force of nature.
Very cool. And this premise sets up the surprise encounter with the alien in such a cool way because...
Well, and I thought these were going to be so connected. Knowing going into the book that there is an alien, I thought that the astrophage was directly connected to the
alien or something. Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of what the trailer makes you think. It's like, oh, you're going to go to the sun and then you're going to meet this alien and it's going to have something to do with what's going on. But no, not really, because, there's also the surprise reveal that he's not at our sun. He's not at Sol. He's at this other star. And you're like, whoa, wait, I didn't expect that. And then he encounters this other alien that is in like a similar situation to him, which we're about to get into the summary. But like, that's such a cool way to do it. And I love how plausible he made it seem. The thinking was so smart. It was this idea of like, if our two civilizations were at different technology levels, we wouldn't be meeting because we wouldn't need to. If either of us were less developed, we wouldn't be here at all because we wouldn't be able to because we wouldn't have space travel. And if we were more advanced, we wouldn't be here because we would know how to solve the problem already. We wouldn't have this issue. So that made it really cool of like finding a way to sort of like have two civilizations at a similar tech level meet.
Yeah.
It's very cool, and it becomes this situation of like a shared enemy, like a shared problem that we're going to now try and tackle. Love that. So let's just talk a little bit about this other thing that was revealed in this, and that's this idea that why is he here? Because that's one of the mysteries that is pulled out. It's like, why is this teacher on this crazy mission? Did he volunteer? And I think, I was under the assumption that he did, that this was a heroic choice, right?
Right.
And I love this reveal that in actuality, he did not want to do it. And in fact, he was sort of cowardly in that he said, I'm not going to go. I turned this down. And he was instead forced into this. That works so well because it sets up, and we'll save this maybe for the very end since we're going to get to the end, but I think it sets up the end where he gets another chance to instead be brave and to show, his what he's got going for him here. And I love that because I didn't expect it. It's this cool surprise, and yet it feels so inevitable. It feels like the way it was supposed to be. So I think Andy Weir really found something special with this story here.
Definitely. A few things that I want to talk about before we move on from it is just like the idea of the astrophage and how it feels like on the surface it's going to be too complicated for a lot of people to latch onto, but he doles it out perfectly. And like the way that they are discovering, the human race is discovering what astrophage is and how it's like, how it can be manipulated and killed, and the way that they progress that, and then how eventually they see how it can store energy in such an efficient way and release it in a way that we've never seen before.
So cool too that they use the very thing that is killing the star in order to create the drive, like it's the fuel for the drive needed, because it does sort of break how we understand, I guess, material science in some ways. You're able to use it as that speculative element that gives us the ability to do the near the speed of light travel that they're able to achieve here. And that's like just a cool way to like minimize the number of big leaps you're trying to ask the reader to sign on for. Like, you're already getting them to accept this astrophage is a thing and it behaves in the way in which you're describing. If you use that very thing to then power your spaceship, they're already kind of on board with it, right? Like, that's kind of the premise of the novel. So I feel like it really is a cool way to like rapidly advance what we're able to actually do in a believable way because you're using something that they've already bought into. I don't know, I thought really clever.
Especially because they have the Strat character who basically grasps onto all government and power in the entire world and gets everyone to work together. And I think obviously like it's fairly on the nose, but this idea of like, you know, a common enemy for the world, the idea of the world coming together in this way and working together, and what we could achieve if we all put aside our differences and stopped warring and could really further civilization. And it's interesting to see some characters along the way who are like optimistic and pessimistic. Like there's this character who creates these like beetle drives that is like, astrophage is the future. It's going to be fucking awesome. Once we figure this out, it's going to like totally change everything. We're going to have the greatest power sources that's clean, renewable energy, and we're never going to have to think about, you know, the global warming and all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, but we're having to like enact insane global warming on our planet just to survive until
that
astrophage
was a
is
wild
not
part where they're like,
anywhere.
we're going to create runaway global warming just to keep our planet warm enough to offset the cooling that's happening.
Well, and they're nuking like Antarctica to put like, you know, to put ice into the ocean. And
it's crazy,
like,
man. And like, I love that there was like this climate scientist who was like just absolutely gutted about it. He's like, this is the exact opposite of what I wanted to do with my life. Yeah, it was cool because it makes sense that would happen, but also totally makes sense that it feels so wrong and that someone like that would absolutely hate it.
Well, and it's incredible. It's irreversible, but it's like the opposite is you lose the planet, you know? Yeah. So it's like, it makes sense. Desperate times, desperate measures.
Yeah. It's like when they basically pave over like a third of the Sahara with this like special substance. And
and it changes the climate of the world. Like all these winds are different now and different weather patterns and stuff. And like, it's just like fundamentally changing it forever, but in order to save it, it was very interesting concepts.
I like that part too, where she's like, where he asks her like, "What are you gonna do after this?" And she's like, "Oh, I'll probably be tried for like crimes against humanity." Yep. You know what I mean? Like she knows that like she's like, I'm gonna be the scapegoat, and like I've kind of signed up for that because her ultimate ethos is like whatever it takes to save humanity is worth it, and then at the end of it, somebody's gonna need to take the blame for, you know, any mistakes that happen along the way, or just like the collateral damage that's going to happen along the way. Yeah. And that's going to be me. And like, she accepts that from the jump. So I don't know. I think that's really admirable. She's a very cool character. Yeah.
In a really dark way, because I don't trust any one person to be this person.
No.
In current humanity, but
no,
interesting for sure for the story. The other thing that Weir does here that I think is awesome is it's such a multicultural story because we're bringing in all these, you know, China and Russia and America working together.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. We had some of that in The Martian too, right? Like we're reaching out to these different teams in other countries who coming up with different ideas that they can use to try and, I love the way he brings different countries' space programs together and like has the scientists sort of like get like it cuts through all the noise of politics and like we can just share ideas. And I think that's some of the best stuff that like the space endeavors can bring out in humanity in the real world. And you can just tell that Andy Weir is just such a geek about this stuff and that he loves NASA and he loves all this kind of stuff and he just wants to write stories about it.
It's awesome. And like it was cool because like, the Russian suit is the best suit, and like, all these, it's like they put pride aside and they really look at like, it's like a meritocracy of like what is the best here, and like let's stop like being so prideful and like seeing it's really cool to see. And in that way we get the characters who when Ryland Grace awakens, these characters are dead. The Chinese and the Russian astronauts that were supposed to be with him on the mission, they didn't survive the coma. And that whole exploration of like coma and what it would do to you and how difficult it would be to keep a human alive for 4 years in this way, like that, all that exploration is interesting. And then ultimately the reveal for him to have to like grapple with these people that he doesn't remember that are now dead, but it feels like an importance, and he's got tears running down his face and he doesn't even remember them. And I thought all that was like really, really well done, and it all of it has more impact as we learn more about the characters in the flashback. So it's kind of cool how it pushes and pulls that way.
Yeah, man, and it definitely deals with some like real science behind that, and like like the difficulty of long-term comas, what it does to your body, is an interesting sort of speculative element brought in of this idea that like certain people have a gene that allows them to like handle comas better than others. Pretty sure that's not a real thing, but I like the way that he engages with that. It's one of those things where like I'm willing to suspend my disbelief enough because we need to get a reason that is at least somewhat plausible as to why he's on this ship.
Right.
And it just needs to be plausible enough for me. Like it doesn't have to 100% work. And I think part of what happens here too is like he does all this to make him one of the ones, but then he has this explosion happen where he is now like the last resort who gets forced into it. And like it sets up a character moment that I think is brilliant for the story. So I get that there might be some people who look at this and like roll their eyes or think that it's too far-fetched, but like you kind of have to do it to get the story, and the story is so good. I don't know. There's an attitude I think sometimes, especially when reading hard sci-fi, of like I want to suspend my disbelief as little as possible, and like don't you dare make me suspend it one iota more than you have to. And sometimes it makes me a little frustrated because I'm like, let's cut him a little slack. He's telling a story. This is ultimately fiction. This is supposed to be entertaining. Yes, it's unlikely that this would ever happen, but come on, we're already in a very unlikely scenario, and let's just buy into it so we can have a good story.
He also like kind of lampshades some of the stuff. He is actually drugged that causes the memory loss and the stuff with the coma. So it's less about like the interesting stuff with the coma is like it's future science that's not necessarily there yet, but I buy into it well enough. And like I've never been sedated in that way. I know you. I mean, I don't know what you're comfortable sharing, but
no, that's fine. Yeah, I was in a medically induced coma for like a week, I think, or 10 days, something like that.
You mentioned before that you've had like a ton of memory loss around that and stuff too, right? Like you don't remember certain days and that kind of,
No, and that's a well-known side effect of those kind of comas, at least as medically induced comas, is that they do sort of create amnesia around the event.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's plausibility there. That's like a fact.
Yeah, totally. All right, I'm going to read this next section here because we got a lot to talk about. The narrative begins in earnest as Grace wakes up on the starship Hail Mary with no memory of his name, his mission, or how he arrived in deep space. He is the sole survivor. His two crewmates died in their coma beds during the years-long journey. As his memories slowly return through traumatic flashbacks, he begins investigating the Tau Ceti system and encounters an alien vessel made of xenonite, an impossibly strong supermaterial. He makes contact with the ship's lone survivor, a 5-legged, eyeless, spider-like engineer that he names Rocky. Since Rocky's species communicates through musical chords and lives in a high-pressure, high-heat environment, the two build a pressurized observation chamber and use custom software to translate their languages. They soon realize that both of their home systems are dying from the same solar infection. By pooling their unique strengths, humanity's understanding of relativity, and the Iridian master of material science, they discover that Tomiba, a natural predator that keeps the astrophage population in check at Tau Ceti, they spend months selectively breeding the strain of Tomiba that can survive the specific atmospheric conditions of Venus and Rocky's home planet Erid. We get the meeting of Rocky, this other ship. We already touched on it a little bit with the idea of these two different civilizations being at similar tech levels. But I was so delighted to see this story explore a concept that we have already talked about a little bit with Arrival in our conversation with Ted Chiang. This is like a very kind of different angle at it, but it's still this idea of like first contact and trying to figure out how to communicate with another being who may or may not have any shared references, and how difficult that is. I love the way that, you know, both of these authors approach this from like a different way. And like, obviously there's a big, spoiler for Arrival that changes sort of the dynamics of that, the way that plays out. Andy Weir, in approaching this with this shared problem and this shared tech level of like realizing, okay, they're both civilizations that are similar tech level. They have to share certain awareness or perceptions and able to be able to get to where they are. It's so well thought out. And explored, and I think it plays pretty fair with this stuff throughout, and the way that they slowly begin to translate and find this shared language is so cool. And then again, you already touched on it. The audiobook does this incredibly well with these kind of musical notes that it then begins to translate into this musical sounding speech. And it just makes it for a really engaging listen. So yeah, if you're a fan of audiobooks at all, I do think this is a cool one to do.
It was really fun. So I had to think a lot about Arrival. We've talked about it multiple times on this podcast, and it's just like it was an excellent, one of my favorite films of that year, and it's still like one of my favorite sci-fi films, I'd say. You know, I was thinking throughout, like, because I don't think the reveal of the similar tech statuses happens until a bit into the story. So early on, I was like, yeah, but like Arrival's already taught us that like some other civilization that developed in a different way, some other species may perceive just all communication, the world, their perception on life entirely different. And it wasn't until he said, not only are they similar tech, but also we may share a common ancestor.
Yeah, the panspermia theory, which is a real theory out there. And I love that. You know, it's never confirmed, but it's like it's touched on and kind of suggested as an explanation for this, that some common ancestor way back when seeded different life forms on different planets. This is a real theory that exists out there. And, you know, in a situation like this, I totally think you could see that and go, maybe that is an explanation for why there are certain similarities in the way that life exists on these two, even wildly different planets with wildly different forms of life. There is certain similarities there.
Yeah, so I love that he did enough there for me to buy it. And you know, once I've bought it, which I bought it early on because I was so excited about this character. Rocky is such a lovable character that like we don't understand in so many ways, and seems like it would be so off-putting, like a rock spider.
Yeah.
And the way that like
it only has 6 limbs though, so it's a 6-limbed spider, which is not really a spider, but I can see why you might call it one.
Well, and it moves in a similar way. It kind of rolls its legs up and stuff at times. But anyway, he calls Rocky a he, so I think we should call him he here within the book. So he the way that he is such a clever inventor, and the way that he's able to use this xenonite that we can't even fathom. We have never even created this chemical compound before. And the way that he uses it in so many interesting ways is another kind of like astrophage moment where it's like, all right, this alien has a compound that you can't fathom, and now I'm going to tell you all the things it does. And then he doesn't break his own rules with that compound. And throughout it, it's a very important piece of the puzzle. But it was so cool to see like he can make it clear at times, and he creates like habitable zones and that's one of the other major things is I love how much we dove into the anatomy of Rocky. There's an emergency at one point, and we learn about like his internal systems and how like Ryland thinks he's helping, but he's actually hurting when he's trying to heal himself. And like the way that he's experiencing like 22 times the gravity of Earth. So any sort of habitable zone has to like have a certain level of pressure, temperature, like it's got to be ammonia based versus oxygen based. And that's all what builds out such a cool alien character. And like all you want is for these characters to hug. Like, I don't know, throughout I was just like, I just want them to be able to hug because they love each other so much.
Because he's like 1,000,000 degrees.
And he weighs he weighs like
and
400
pounds or something. Yeah.
We talked about Mark Watney is an isolated character. These characters latch onto each other, and like I love that the language of science and math is the language that they eventually develop to then translate for each other because of the fundamental chemical, like chemistry, compounds of the universe and how many atoms they contain and protons and neutrons. They use that to establish numbers, and then they basically are able to start to communicate and translate back and forth.
And this is real thinking on First Contact, by the way. There's lots of stuff that you can read out there. There's some YouTubers who've made some great videos about all the efforts that humanity have made around First Contact. You know, obviously, like we haven't actually had it, but like sending out messages into space, thinking like this could be the first thing that gets encountered. A lot of the best thinkers in the world were like, what can we put on here that we think somebody might be able to interpret? And it goes down to a lot of that of like base, we're going to show chemical bonds, we're going to show mathematics. There's certain things that you would hope that if we live in a universe with a shared sort of rule set, that another civilization might be able to interpret.
And so, but what I love so much about, and part of the heart of the story for me, is that we approach that from a scientific and mathematic perspective, and slowly that develops into empathy through like a shared experience. And so the idea of rather than empathy then leading to common understanding or something like that, like starting at the hard science of it all and having that eventually be a translation of love into these characters caring for each other to the point that they're willing to make massive sacrifices and possibly risk their own races to save each other at different times. And it's just like, especially right now, it's just nice to see like people, caring so much about each other.
Yeah, man. I really like it. It reminded me a little bit of Enemy Mine in that way. We go all the way back to that.
That's a
very different kind of movie. But
I wonder how many people who are listening to our Project Hail Mary coverage have seen Enemy Mine.
Worth checking out. If you like, 80s sci-fi. I love that he was able to develop Rocky into a character that we cared about. And I was noticing all the little clever things he was doing, like the way that Rocky had a sense of humor, the way that we develop the sense of shared sociality, or there's a social system in place that, has been accepted, I think, by many people as a possible fundamental need or requirement for a society, is that there has to be a connective bond between individuals. And the way that he explores that as like watching each other sleep was a cool element, right? And then the way that Rocky wants to watch Ryland sleep becomes like a fun part of it. It's like this is a cultural thing, and they both kind of just like, whenever someone says this is a cultural thing, they just have to like a go with it. I love that.
Well, and that's a science and an engineer, like that's a logical thing. Don't oppose this. This is something important to me, and I won't oppose the thing that's important to you. And then in that way, like the mutual respect of the back and forth. And what that does is it creates trust, and it creates like, that bond that you're talking about. And I wanted to talk in this episode too. I wanted to be like, sleep, I watch. Good. And they're like, what do you think of this story, Luke? Question? Like that. I love the way that Rocky talks. It was so fun and engaging.
Yeah, I agree. It was like a very unique, communication form that, it's like just believable enough, right? And one of my favorite reveals from this sort of interaction is the moments around Ryland figuring out that Rocky can't see. I thought that was such a cool, again, like speculative idea of like, what if we encounter an alien species that doesn't have the sense of sight, and how fundamentally that would change the way they perceive the universe. And this idea that like Rocky can hardly believe that it's possible that Ryland can see light. It's like, you can see light? Like how? And it's like, with these organs on my face. And it's like, that's insane. I just love that, right? Like, and the way that again, like we lean into strengths, and like I was weirdly like proud of humanity sometimes. Like, humans are good at this, like this is the thing we're good at, It's so funny because it just shows that I was like fully bought in on the premise. And I don't know, it was really cool how they were like discovering each other's strengths and weaknesses. I love that that Rocky was an engineer, not a scientist, and it enables him to like not have to explore the hows of things. Because Rocky's like, I don't know how it works, I just use it. And Ryland's like, yeah, I guess that's fair. I don't know how this tablet works, but I use it as well, right? And there's so many things like that we do use in our day-to-day. Again, that's a way of like Andy Weir saying like, let's not worry too much about that. Let's move on with the story. But in a way that feels plausible to me.
Yeah. And just in terms of the way that like a story can change your perspective and show you somebody else's like look at the world or just look at the universe, I thought it was so interesting to think of Rocky as a character that didn't have sight, and the way that they talked about like, where he's going to go out and like spacewalk basically. And like Rocky's like, we would never do that. We send robots out there because they can't see, and they're just, Weir describes it as like diving into a pool that's full of black ink. Like,
because there's no sound in space either. So if you're out there, you can't experience anything.
They grew up in a society society. Rocky, the Arids, grew up in a society not looking up at the stars and seeing the universe above them and stuff. They eventually use like other means.
Yeah, I guess it'd be like microphones or something. They have like a tremor sense or something, kind of similar to like a bat, like sonar. Basically, it's described.
Hyper sense too. Like he can hear him across the ship and stuff.
Yeah, and like you can see through walls essentially with it. This ability to like perceive things. Let's talk a little bit about the Tomebas and like the sort of revelation around that. So like the astrophage, it's sort of discovered that the reason it's not affecting this star is that its home world is like right here, and on its home world they find out it had a predator, in this amoeba, this Talmeba they call it. And so it's so cool that like basically their way of combating this like mold, this biological life form that has spread, it's starting to spread from multiple stars, is to find its like natural predator and like do some genetic engineering essentially to create a version that can keep up with the astrophage now, and is particularly suited to the environments that they need it to be suited for
Venus and
so forth.
Third planet or something.
Yeah, very cool. Again, it just felt like a clever way to solve this problem. And then I like that this solution is found pretty early on, but then it's like the execution has to happen, and that's where a lot of like the further difficulties come up, is through the challenges around the execution of it.
The mission that they go on to retrieve the Talmeba is so ill-advised and everything. Both Rocky and Ryland Grace realize this, but what a fucking insane journey they go on, and how like terrifying everything becomes. Like I think they got a little sure of themselves or something. Like he's like gonna fly the ship into certain orbit, and they built this chain that's gonna go down and grab this Talmeba and pull it back up. But like the damage that's done to the ship, and then what the Talmeba actually represents as a predator to their fuel source that's in the ship.
Yeah, because they realize that it's our fuel, so it being a predator to that is actually really bad for us. Very cool how like back and forth it was like Ryland's convinced he's going to die. This is a suicide mission. Then he's like, oh, maybe I will be able to get back. I can borrow some of their fuel. There'll be enough fuel to get home. And then his fuel gets wiped out, and he's like, I'm going to die again. And then like just the back and forth of, am I going to die? Am I not going to die? I love all of that.
I also love a human explaining both relativity and radiation to an alien.
Dude, the part where it was like, oh no, they don't understand relativity. Sit down. We're going to have a long talk. It's such a good part where it's like, all right, yeah, you're not gonna like this one, but here we go. Like I love that part.
And the radiation too is heartbreaking, because it's like they had so many crew members, and you think about like what Ryland Grace went through, and then you think about like Rocky being alone on his ship, and how many people were there, and how they all died just because they were unaware of radiation, and how like it's so interesting that like there's probably things that we wouldn't know in that scenario that would cause us to be.
I love that this is sort of Andy Weir's way of justifying this, was when he was talking about all the things that humanity did with the original trip to the moon before we understood so many of these concepts. And it was like, how can you imagine a spacefaring civilization that doesn't understand X, Y, and Z? Well, yeah, because that was us. Like when we originally launched our space program, we didn't understand all of it. And it's crazy to think about the tech that was around in the 60s and shit when they're like flying into the moon. Like it's unbelievable that we were able to do it. And so when you think about that, you're like, yeah, I guess, yeah, it could be plausible that maybe they found a way, but they didn't understand fully relativity, and this is sort of the problems they get into because they don't understand it.
And this is their first foray into space travel. Yeah, like they didn't have all the other practice. They just built the ship. They've realized the emergency. They built the ship because they had no reason to search the cosmos.
They had done near orbits, but they hadn't gone outside of that because they had no reason to. They didn't know about that. Yeah. They didn't have any moon, too, it was said, so they had no like moon to like want to go to first.
And they have just an insane amount of fuel, because they didn't understand that like as you move closer to the way that relativity is going to work with like you coming closer to something, and when you move closer to the speed of light, how time is affecting you differently versus
time dilation. There's a lot of things that it seems like they didn't fully understand, but it ends up working in his favor.
Their favor. So they have a lot of extra fuel. Yeah. So I saw at the beginning of the book there's a dedication to John, Paul, Ringo, and George, who are the Beatles. And I thought that was really interesting as I started it. And then like throughout there kept being these like references, and then obviously more directly these Beatles that are created that will hold like the possible like salvation for humanity that'll be sent back from the Hail Mary, since it's a suicide mission. But like throughout, there were also times that he was threading in like Yellow Submarine and like Album. Obviously, like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club was in there.
Yeah. There's that one researcher who named something Peter because it's like the precursor, and that was like the original drummer for the Beatles. Yeah.
So that was cool throughout. And then I was also, of course, like in telling a story about space, like he's referencing Alien and Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Predator.
Because he knows pop culture, right? Like he's able to reference pop culture.
And then like in naming Rocky, and then in naming the planet that they go to, because Rocky finds the planet. He's like the person who discovered the planet. He has first naming rights, so he names it after his wife, because Rocky has a wife back on his home planet. And then Ryland decides to name it Adrian after Rocky's wife in the Rocky films, which is just so fun. Like all throughout, there's like all of this like, I don't know, fun pop culture stuff that's being like seeded in that I found fun to like kind of look out for.
Agreed, man. It's so cool. It's that's that little bit of that Andy Weir magic. All right, let's get into the final chunk of plot here, and then we can react to the book as a whole. So, as the two friends depart for their respective homes with the cure, a technical disaster strikes. Tomoeba suddenly evolve the ability to permeate xenonite, the very material used for Rocky's fuel tanks and Grace's storage containers. After they part ways and begin their return journeys, Grace discovers the leak on his own ship and realizes with horror that Rocky's vessel is doomed. Without the xenonite tight seals, the Amoeba will consume Rocky's astrophage fuel, leaving him stranded to starve in the void. Grace is forced to make a harrowing moral choice: return to Earth to live as a hero, or sacrifice his life to save his friend. He chooses the latter, launching the automated beetles containing the Amoeba and his research back to Earth before turning the Hail Mary around to rescue Rocky. 16 years later, Grace is living on Arid in a specialized habitat, eating synthetic food and teaching science to a classroom of young Iridian students. The novel concludes as Rocky shares a monumental update. The sun has returned to its original luminance. Though Grace may never see Earth again, he finds peace knowing that his sacrifice successfully saved the human race. Yeah, let's talk about this. I think it's really cool how we basically lead up to the third act conclusion of like, we're putting our plan into action, harvesting this Tomoeba, we're using it. We are using it to power our ships. This thing I thought was going to be a suicide mission is now no longer a suicide mission. We're saying goodbye and we're setting off home. And it feels like this is the end. And I love this twist that gets thrown in, and it's very, like you said, alien in the sense of like there's like a fourth act all of a sudden that gets tacked on. This, oh no, we've got another disaster to deal with.
And I love this part, and I noticed as like they were saying goodbye to each other, I was like, it just feels like this isn't a monumental enough goodbye for these two characters. Like once how close they've grown, and it's such a sad. So there's a couple, and one other thing, like I mentioned before, when Rocky saves Ryland at one point, when there's like a centrifugal spin that they fall into.
That's another like big climactic moment, where they save each other.
Rocky breaks through his habitat on Ryland's ship, and then he goes and pulls Ryland off because he's much stronger, pulls him, he's like kind of pinned to his own panels and everything, and so he pulls him off, is able to basically save him, but in doing so he's breathing oxygen, and oxygen like ignites in his body, and he like catches fire inside of his body and like seemingly dies. At this point, my wife is crying while we're reading the story together. I'm definitely almost crying. It was so sad, and I'm like, he's got to save him. There's no way he's not going to save him. We'll figure out how. And then he kind of puts him into his own section and ends up hurting himself, basically carries him to his own area, burns himself, and then sets off this like basically like explosion of ammonia that is supposed to like fill all of Rocky's side of things, and in doing that he like gets chemical burns in his lungs and like takes a bunch of damage and stuff. So he's then in a like the medical bot has to like save him while Rocky's also healing, so they're both like down for the count. Then Rocky comes back, and there's this thing that he had done, that Ryland had done, of like shooting ammonia into his what he thought were like his lungs, his radiator area, because he saw that there was like smoke coming out of it. Come to find out that was like ripping off a scab for him, and I just thought all of that sequence was so fun, and tense.
It's also very believable, right? That it's just the whole thing where you think you're helping, but you don't really understand their biology, and so the idea that you would be able to is so remote that I love that it's like, oh no, actually you were You almost killed me when you did that. That was actually bad.
And I kept having these moments of being like, how would there's no way that he would figure this out. And one of the things was the Talmiba. I was like, they're breeding the Talmiba. I'm like, you don't know what you're introducing when you're trying to play God and you're trying to like breed it over multiple generations and force evolution.
And that's exactly what causes the problem.
Yeah. And I liked that he kind of like called me on that. Like Andy Weir was like, well, I knew you were thinking that. So you're right. This is what happened. And like for them to be able to permeate through the Xenonite was such a cool detail that was so catastrophic.
Yeah. And you know what I also love about it in like just like an abstract way? To me, I love that the Talmiba gets a little bit of that like special sauce that the astrophage has. Of like, this is a like reality. It's like, it doesn't bend reality. That's not really the right way to put it, because it operates within our concepts of reality, but it's doing it in a way that we just like don't know that that's just possible. So it almost feels kind of magical, but within the realms of science. And so for it to have a predator that would actually threaten it, like that thing needs to also kind of feel that way. And so I love that in the creation of this Talmiba, it becoming the new threat at the end, it kind of is it works, right? Like it makes it feel like it is on par with that astrophage. It's like, yeah, this stuff can get through the Xenonite that you thought was this like essentially perfect material, and you know it proves that's not true. Yeah.
And it was directly Ryland's fault also, like in because he was trying to cleanse them with the nitrogen, and they were looking for a way to escape the nitrogen. So if he hadn't been doing that, which he had to do obviously, but like if he hadn't been doing that, then they wouldn't have evolved to try to escape into that and like survive in that way. So that's just like, again, he's introducing variables without thinking he is.
Yeah. I just, the idea of Andy Weir, you know, alone at his computer thinking through all of this is so cool. Like I assume he, especially through the process of releasing The Martian, he probably knows tons of scientists now, and I'm sure he has lots of people he can reach out to and ask questions. He probably knows astrobiologists, which is such a like niche field, but it's like, you know, when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, this would be the perfect people to like pick their brain on, because they're the kind of people who like think about this kind of stuff all the time. Regardless of how he's doing the research, he's pulling it all together into this engaging narrative in such a spectacular way. I'm really impressed with this stuff. And it leads to this extra ending we get, where all of a sudden we realize, oh, the other reason that it felt unresolved is we had this dangling thread of Ryland being a coward. Like, ultimately, he had this memory of, like, I'm not a hero. I was forced into this. And through my actions, I have now become a hero. But he never really chose it. And we like subconsciously, you know, I kind of was consciously aware of it, but maybe you were as well. But it's like, I feel like a lot of people are maybe not thinking about it consciously, but subconsciously you kind of know. You're like, something feels a little unresolved here, and that's what gets resolved at this final ending. Is now we see Ryland make the choice. Now he truly says, I am going to give up my return trip home to go help my friend, because I know that he's stranded, and his entire civilization. It's also fucked. He's like, I can go save humanity and just be like, fuck you and forget about them, but I'm not going to do that. So I love that he's able to go catch up to him. I don't know how in the world this would be possible, that you could like locate him and find him in the vastness of space.
He at least makes it really like
he makes it hard, but
he makes it hard in the book.
But there's one point where he's like floating through space and hopes that he's going to collide with it, and then he does. Like I was like, wow, I don't know how we're getting here, but okay. Again, I'm able to go with it. And maybe there is more plausibility to this than I know.
It's very dramatic too. Like I appreciate it. At that point, he's built up enough goodwill for me to be like, yeah, it's like, this is such a cathartic experience for us to get to the point, because we want Rocky to be saved so bad. We hear about Rocky so much, and the way that he does it, and he's like he's banging on the side of the ship and he's shouting for Rocky. And that's like, it just is so, again, that's cinematic. Like that's going to look awesome in the movie.
Very cool. Yeah. And so we get this final part where he's now living on their home world. And it's kind of cute, but like it makes sense that like he's now basically a teacher. He's teaching young versions of these aliens. He's friends with his buddy, and he lives there by himself.
I love that was the very final reveal too. It's like he like has another thing that he needs to go do. He's like, Rocky, I'll see you later. And then he goes into this room, and then there's like all these young Arids, and like they're all. I was like, that's so fun that he like at full circle like continues to be a teacher, because I think it's also Andy Weir saying like a teacher is capable of doing all these things and then still choosing to be a teacher. Like you don't have to like have evolved to be like a hero now, and now he's permanently a hero. He can still do this thing that he loves and continue to do something that is, you know, really important in terms of like sharing that story and education.
Yeah, I was considering asking you like a would you do it kind of question here, but like I think it's not really fair because he sets up a particular character that if I were Ryland, I would do it. And it's like he's custom built this character who it makes sense for him to do it in this way because Ryland has no strong connections back on Earth, right? We don't hear about any like close relations, family. We don't hear about a spouse. He's single. He doesn't have any children, right? Like he doesn't have family that he like wants to go back and see. So there's not that kind of pulling him back to Earth. And then like his connection to education and his own like ability to like impart stuff onto the future totally makes sense. So you're able to create a character to where it makes complete sense for Ryland in this situation to go to the other home planet and live there instead of returning home. All that being said, I still love that he actually does leave the door open. He's like, I might still go home. And he's like, yeah, I'm getting old and maybe I probably won't. And I get the sense that he probably won't. But I think Andy Weir knows that psychologically it would be very difficult, no matter what you did, to have to live as the only human in this other society and like be okay. Like, that's a big ask.
Especially because like he talks about how like he's living on like a black, dark planet basically.
Yeah.
Like
he had to like invent light bulbs just so that he could have light and stuff like that. Yeah.
Otherwise he's just living in darkness.
And he's in a habitat. Like he's all the time he's in a habitat. He's essentially by himself. Yes, he has his friend there and Rocky he can talk to.
His best friend. He says he's his best friend. So that's important.
But I think also he's dealing with the idea of like just space travel and relativity and the short human life is the other impediments around this. Like just the reality of knowing like it's going to take me this number of years to get home. Yeah. I only have so many left. Like, is it worth it to me? That whole idea of like, there's a part where he was like considering going home without ever going into a coma. And I'm like, dude, there have been studies about this. You are not going to make it. Like just go into the coma. Like humans cannot be that alone for that long. Like it sounds good to you. And then the idea is also that he's going to have to eat like a paste the whole time.
Yeah.
And people like to romanticize this and go like, I love just spending time alone with myself. And it's like that stuff just goes away so fast. And all the studies they've done on this, it's like the human psyche we're made to be social beings, and it's so hard to even conceive of that amount of time alone. And that's not to say it's never happened. Like people have spent a long times alone, whether they're imprisoned or stranded or things like that. It does occasionally happen, but it's really detrimental to your psychology. So I kept thinking like he's probably going to go into the coma at some point, but I think it was enough plausibility to keep him awake so that when the stuff starts going wrong, he can notice it.
Yeah, and he gave himself some experiments and things that he needed to be doing.
Yeah, and he's like, I need to write about all these conversations I had. And I totally get that. I would absolutely be that way. Like, I'm going to take as much time as I possibly can before I go into this coma, because again, I don't know if I'm going to live through it, so that's a big risk. But, like, yeah, you would probably push yourself as much as you could. And, yeah, I'd want to, like, document everything that happened fully and that kind of stuff. Sure.
I also love that he has, like, every book, every, like, piece of information, every video game, everything ever. Like, he talked about, like, how he had all that as well.
I do think that would help.
It would help, but you'd still probably go a little crazy.
You'd still, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One thing that I'll say too is like his decision to go back to save Rocky too. Like the main thing that to key in on for me is like he also saw that as death because he didn't have enough food to survive.
Yeah, he's like, I'm dead if I do this.
Once he makes it to Rocky, Rocky's the one who's like, well, can you eat Talmiba? And then like the idea of him like surviving.
That was so cool too. And then once again, it's using the thing that is like this other source of speculative, chemistry that makes this whole story work. We're going to take that and have it be a solution for something unexpected. Oh, and then at the end, he's eating me burgers, remember?
Yeah,
it's like cloned his own meat.
He's like, it's great. He's like, don't knock it. You don't even know. He makes a decision to be like, I'm going to die to save Rocky and to save the Arid people. And everything else after that is just bonus. The fact that he still survives, that he's on this other planet, that he gets to be a teacher, he doesn't like, his life effectively could have ended there. So everything else is just like a bonus. And I think this was the right ending. I really appreciate the fact that like he said, that's a bold, cool ending that like feels unique to the story.
I like it, man. This was in so many ways, like in keeping with a lot of Andy Weir's other stuff that I've read. I mean, I guess I've only really read The Martian and The Egg, that one short story we read.
Oh yeah, The Egg was awesome.
But like, yeah, man, this is just really cool. I like this mode for him. I like the idea of like just pushing into even more and more speculative spaces while maintaining that, adherence to scientific accuracy. So I agree. I had a great time with this novel, and I'm really excited to watch the film now. If you enjoyed listening to our coverage, let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're on YouTube, make sure to leave us a comment. Let us know how you feel about this book. Have you seen the movie? Have you read the book? How do they compare? You can start filling us in on that because by the time this comes out, we will have seen the movie. So go ahead. And we love to hear from you.
And be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of those at Ink to Film.
And join our Discord, which there will be a link for in the show notes. That's how you can suggest projects to us. That's how you can engage with us on specific threads about individual projects, including this one. There's lots of fun stuff over on our Discord, and all you have to have done is listen to one episode, and we'd love to have you join us over there. If you'd like to support this podcast in another way, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/inktofilm, and on there you can get bonus episodes that are released every month, and you get the ability to vote on polls for upcoming projects. So check out our Patreon, patreon.com/inktofilm.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man, that's it for this week. I'm excited for this movie. I'm going to go see it in IMAX on Sunday. I already have my tickets purchased. I'm pumped, man.
Yeah, I cannot wait.
Yeah. All right, so that's going to be it. So until next time.
Keep adapting.